Greetings, ladies, gentlemen, everyone in between. Welcome back to another episode of Books and Buds, where we discuss two of the greatest things on planet Earth, books and buds. So, as most of you already know, we're coming at you from the wonderful state of Maine. Now, Burning Bush, the sponsors of this show, is a local medical marijuana company up here in Maine, and as most of you already also know, Stephen King is big up here. This is Stephen King country up here. He even donated some money to the local library in town, and there's this huge wing they attached to it. The guy that painted a huge mural in there, he's a really talented guy, local in our area, the town of Hollowell. Put a big picture in there with Stephen King on it and everything else. So he's got his own branch up there. I mean, everyone knows the guy up here, or at least knows about him. He's widely respected in this community. So I should be doing more Stephen King books. This will only be the third book I've done by him, but I wanna back up some more writers too. I mean, my fiance just finished a book by him, and I've been kind of reading a little bit along with her. But she's doing it for a book club, so I only pick up the book when she puts it down. Got another writer whose book I picked up the other day. He's from Warren, Maine. I'd like to do his book too. But a lot of people who listen or know about Stephen King are not aware of The Eyes of the Dragon. And it's understandable because, as I mentioned in previous videos, I don't believe he's a horror writer. He writes a lot, just many genres. The guy's all over the place. He's even dabbled in a couple of non-fiction books that were both very good. One of my favorite books by him is actually his book on writing. Wonderful book. But that's because I'm a writer. Corpse Lily, by the way, final edits. I just finished them before I sat down to do this one, and that's why I'm doing this. It's kind of like a reward for myself for finally finishing those edits. Figured I'll do a little review and reward myself a little bit. But anyways, I've read a lot of Stephen King. This is not a horror novel. It's not, even though Randall Flagg is in it. Now, Randall Flagg, many of you might remember him from The Stand, and he's in all the Dark Tower books. And he's probably the greatest villain in every single one of Stephen King's books. He's a bigger badass than Pennywise. He's a bigger badass than Carrie. He's a bigger badass than any of them, probably all of them combined. He's a badass. He is the epitome of evil. And he's no different in this book. So this book I'd consider it a YA fantasy. So again, it's not a horror novel. It's a YA fantasy. And a lot of people I've spoken to agree with me on that. It's definitely a fantasy novel, but it's not an epic fantasy. It's not even a high fantasy. It doesn't go into a lot of deep background, a lot of deep backstory about all the characters or anything like that, or the history of the realm. None of that. It starts off with just a king, his two sons, and the wicked wizard who is Randall Flagg. So right away, the king passes away, gets murdered. So the king has two sons. He has Peter, the oldest, and Thomas, the youngest. His wife, the queen, passed away while giving birth to Thomas. So right away, there's a little bit of discord. The king shows some favoritism. So Peter looks a lot like his deceased wife, the queen, and Thomas takes after the king. So there's some favoritism there, and plus Thomas, he's the one who, while giving birth to him, the queen passed away, so the king isn't too fond of him. Not as much as he is with Peter anyways, but so Randall, now because Thomas becomes the king, now the other guy, Peter, the other prince, is kind of an outcast, and he's cast away because he's on the run, because he's the one that's under suspect for the murder. And it's kind of an interesting tale because you go into the stories of both the boys, and it takes place in enough time where it's a coming of age story, but it's coming of age for both kids, both Thomas and Peter, and they grow up separately from one another, become men separate of one another. Peter goes out and finds his own way back into the world where he's trying to, avenge everything, his father's death, and trying to just get his name back, while Thomas is back leading the kingdom. He's the new king, and while he's leading the new kingdom, his, the speaker to the king or whatever it is Randall Flagg. So he's manipulating the whole situation like he does in all of his books. Like he does in all of the books that he appears in. So, come to find out, the Eye of the Dragon, right? So Randall Flagg knows all the passageways in the whole kingdom, and there's a certain passageway that leads to the great throne room or whatever, and there's this huge dragon head mounted on the wall, and Randall Flagg can get in there and he can see through the eye of the dragon what's going on in there. It's one of the ways he's able to manipulate a lot of things. Towards the end of the book, Thomas discovers this, and that's how he finds out who actually killed his father. It's a very, very interesting book. It's, like I said, it's not horror. It was written for Stephen King's daughter, who at the time I believe was a preteen or very early teens. So he even writes right in the back of the book here that he'd written 13 novels by the time his daughter had attained an equal number of years. So she was 13. Okay, I was close. She hadn't read any of them. That's because she didn't like any of the creepy crawlies. She didn't like the vampires, and she's a 13-year-old girl. What the hell would she be interested in all that stuff for? So he wrote this book specifically to try to please her. And he did write it for himself, because I think in order to write a good book, you got to try to write a book that you yourself would want to read. But he did it with her in mind, and to his great joy, he found out that she not only loved it, but she was really disappointed when it ended. So as a writer, that's got to be a wonderful feeling, just to be able to make your kids happy like that with your craft. I imagine a carpenter would like to build a dollhouse for their little girl, and I imagine that would feel pretty good. But whatever, you just want to please your children. You want to make your children happy, and he pulled it off with this book. So it's not written in a way that's really for adults. So if you're a typical Stephen King reader, he writes for adults. I mean, I can think of another one, probably The Girl Who Loved Tom Gordon. That was also written, I'd say that's probably another YA of his, where the little girl gets lost in the woods. She's a big fan of Tom Gordon, Boston Red Sox player, and her love for him kind of keeps her going throughout her ordeal. So there's no real horror in that book. There's no real horror in this book. It's definitely written for children. There's a couple scenes that seem a little iffy. It is Stephen King we're talking about, but I think you could read this to your kid if you wanted as a bedtime story, over the course of a week or two, and they probably wouldn't have any nightmares. It's a very, very good story. Again, fantasy, maybe more or less on the fairy tale front, because it's not long. Like I said, there's no backstory. And I'm a huge Stephen King fan, as most of you who watch my channel already know. So I loved it, and I can't praise the man enough. I think he's just one of the best writers we have, and we're extremely lucky to have him. That's what he says about Neil Gaiman, because he did a little blurb for a Neil Gaiman book a long time ago. He says we're extremely lucky to have him. We're extremely lucky to have you, Stephen King. So, hey, if you liked my review, please consider subscribing, liking my channel. I do a lot of book reviews for lesser-known authors, because that's what I'm trying to do, is boost readership for my friends and for myself. So the more you like, the more you subscribe, the more you comment below, the more you help me get these readers in front of more eyes. So these writers in front of more readers, I should say. So, I mean, hey guys, keep an eye out for my book. Like I just said, I just turned in the final edits, just finally, for my debut novel, Corpse Lily, which is also a nice story, kind of leaning towards YA, but it goes more towards the father and his reaction to his daughter dating the bad boy, the local bad boy. So it's a clash between two men fighting for the love of one girl, but one of them's the father fighting for the love of his daughter. The other one's the school bad boy trying to fight for the love of his crush. So keep an eye out for Corpse Lily. I will definitely keep you in touch. You could have tuned into any station, but for some reason you tuned into mine. I love the hell out of you for it. Keep reading, folks.